Now, most patients don't even know what a label is, right? They think, well, I got a label on my bottle of pills. That's not a drug label. Over half the doctors in the US take money from drug companies. You'd think they would say, no, no, no.
Individual doctors.
Individual doctors. Doctors that take money from drug companies prescribe their drugs more often. And that is wrong. A doctor should give a drug to a patient for one reason only. It's the best therapy available to the patient. That's the best, not it's the newest, hottest drug, not you were golfing with the drug rep this morning, not they paid you $2,000 to sign a ghostwritten paper, which happens all the time. 1 out of 4 American people cannot afford the drugs they need. They're just too expensive. In Canada, it's 1 out of 10.
Why do we pay for medicine?
That's a big question. That's a good question.
20 years ago, Terence Young lost his 15-year-old daughter after she suffered sudden adverse reactions to a prescription drug. Since then, he has beat his own path towards exposing the inner workings of the pharmaceutical industry. His latest book, Forbidden Knowledge, reveals the truth you need to know about prescription drugs and what to do about it. It is your survival guide to Big Pharma. Now, most of us believe that if a medication isn't safe, the government would never allow it on the market, and that doctors would never prescribe a drug that isn't proven effective. Today, Terence reveals who's behind that narrative, whether doctors always have the best interests of patients in mind, how those who suffer adverse reactions are forced to settle in court, and much more. So, forbidden knowledge, what is the forbidden knowledge?
Forbidden knowledge is what no one ever tells patients regarding the true risks of prescription drugs. Prescription drugs all cause adverse effects. That's one of the things that doctors and certainly the pharmaceutical companies don't tell patients. Not just side effects, which makes them sound pretty harmless, but adverse effects. In fact, all prescription drugs are chemicals, synthetic chemicals, that can lead to harms.
Synthetic, what do you mean synthetic?
They're made in laboratories. They're not natural molecules. And the reason is, if you want to make money in the pharmaceutical industry, and they make a lot of money, is you have to have a patent on a molecule. And then you can own that for 20 years. And so you create a molecule, you have an idea what you're going to do with that to create a drug. Then you have to do lab testing to define it and get it approved by regulators. So by that time, you've probably got an average of 12 years to sell your patented medicine for as much as you can.
Why is it forbidden?
The knowledge is forbidden. That's a very good question. Thanks for asking that. Why don't doctors tell patients the true risks of the drugs they're taking? One reason is they don't want patients to act as their own doctor because of the risks related to prescription drugs. So they just want them to take a direction from them. They are the learned intermediary between drug companies and patients. But another reason, and this is a little more insidious, is the pharmaceutical companies don't tell doctors. When they get their drugs approved by the regulators, they play down the safety issues. They don't test drugs for adverse drug reactions. They test them for what they can do to become a medicine. And no one tells the patients because they're afraid they won't take them.
How do you test adverse reactions?
That's a good question too. When they're doing clinical testing for prescription drugs, they do animal testing, laboratory testing, and then they test them on humans. And so they do 4 phases of testing. The first phase is usually on a group of young, healthy males. They don't test them on drugs, women, as often as they should, because women can become pregnant. If you're testing a drug, there could be danger to the fetus.
So these tests are done on male, you mean male human beings?
Yes, male, right. This is human testing. And usually they're paid students, because students need the money. So that you'll see ads in the university newspapers that said, you want to make some money helping discover drugs or whatever, or helping science. Then they go to a larger group of patients, which would be men and women, and they're looking for efficacy. What will this drug do? Will it do what we think it did, and how efficacious is it? Then they go to a larger group of patients. So it's phase 1, 2, 3. In phase 3 of testing, they might have several hundred patients. And so here's some forbidden knowledge they never tell patients. Putting a drug on the market is actually phase 4 of testing. So if you take any new drug, you are actually joining a giant drug trial where they're testing it to see how safe and effective it is. No one ever tells patients this.
Do they know that they are part of an experiment?
No, that's the point. No one tells them. I think that's unethical, totally. The doctor should say, oh, here's this new drug on the market. You may have seen it advertised on TV. We think it will help you. Would you like to try that? They don't say, oh, there's a drug still in phase 4 of testing that's on the market, and I think it might help you. Would you like to try it? And the patient says, a lot of patients will say, no, I don't want to be part of a giant drug trial. I won't.
Does the company keep track of the results with these patients? Like, do the patients go back and say, this happened, that happened?
They do that in phase 1, 2, and 3. But in phase 4, it's the open market. It's like the Wild West.
So is the point just to avoid new drugs?
Yes. In fact, I have a section in my book, 10 rules for taking prescription drugs safely. And one of the rules is don't take any new drug on the market until it's been on the market for 7 years. Because
Why 7?
if the harms are going to appear for a drug, including deaths, by the way, they'll mostly be identified by the 7th year. But 1 in 5 drugs that are approved on the market in the US and Canada ends up either being taken off the market for harming or killing patients or having a new high-level warning. In the US, they call it a black box warning, so that your doctor would see that and hopefully mention it to you. Health Canada, on the other hand, even after 20 years, they still don't issue black box warnings like the Americans get. I've been working on that for 20 years, so I just don't think Health Canada is a very good regulator.
Why?
Well, they know that if, say, you take a new drug, if they've seen potential harms happening in the US, they publish a label for the drug. And the label can be anywhere from 40 to 60 pages of small print. And it's full of what I call pharmaspeak, language that patients can't understand. In Canada, the same company with the same drug will have a different label. Okay? Now, most patients don't even know what a label is, right? They think, well, I got a label on my bottle of pills. That's not a drug label. To get a drug approved by regulators worldwide, they have to publish the equivalent of 40 cartons of information, safety and efficacy, to the regulators. And the regulators say yes or no. And if they say yes, that information is called the official prescribing information. Patients never see it. It's very rare. But in the US, if there are considerable risks to a drug, they're required to put a black box warning on the 60-page label. On the first page, in bold print. Canada doesn't do that, even though it's the exact same drug and the exact same company.
Why is it that the wizard's language, or whatever you say, why is it like that? Why can't people understand what they're reading? Why not make it easy to understand?
Doctors are lazy. Yes, not all. Most doctors are lazy. They don't read the labels. Guys, they should never be giving you a drug unless they've read that label. But that's half an hour. Well, I don't have half an hour. Really? They don't want to be challenged also. They want to be in charge. And they're taught that in medical school. You're in charge. You've got to take care of this patient. It's your responsibility, right? That's the way they operate. And also, they're taught to have answers all the time. And after doing it for decades, they provide answers. And sometimes the answers are wrong, and they don't like to be challenged. And sometimes some doctors bully patients too, right? But we're taught from the time you're a little kid, do what the doctor tells you.
So if it's forbidden knowledge, Terence, how come you have it?
I have it because I was brought into this through the death of my daughter, Vanessa, who died in actually March 2000. She fell dead in front of me. I began investigating her death right away, and I discovered that 4 doctors knew she was taking this drug, and that the drug label, which doctors don't bother reading, gave a warning, a vague warning, but a warning that it could cause heart arrhythmia and potentially death. None of the doctors mentioned it to her. None of the doctors mentioned it to her parents, my wife and I. And the more I investigated the industry, the more corrupt practices I found. The people at Health Canada have been taught over decades that the pharmaceutical industry is their partner in healthcare. Pharmaceutical industry is not our doctor's partner. They're not our government's partner. They are business people. Their entire industry is designed to sell drugs and make as much money as they can from them. They're not going to come to a regulator and say, oh, by the way, watch out for this, watch out for that. We're concerned about this. They give them the minimum information they need to get a drug approved. And here's a very serious problem. The standard to prove that a drug works couldn't be lower. Remember, they all cause adverse effects. They all can cause harms. So
Every single drug?
all prescription drugs cause harms. Some of them, thousands.
Thousands of what?
Thousands of different harms. Thousands of effect on the body. They don't study them for them. They study just to find one thing, one effect that they can sell.
Isn't the whole point to make people better?
For doctors, it's supposed to be, yes. Patients who go to doctors and trust them, of course. That's what the healthcare is supposed to do. But the pharmaceutical industry, that's secondary. And they have consistently been either the top or one of the top most profitable companies for the last 30 years in North America. They're there to make money.
That's the primary.
That's primary. Patients being better, that's secondary for them. And let me tell you where that leads. 1 out of 4 American people cannot afford the drugs they need. They're just too expensive. In Canada, it's 1 out of 10. Now, a drug that you can't afford doesn't help you at all. The average price of a cancer drug is $180,000 a year. How many people can afford that? Not very many. Even the deductibles, patients can't afford them. So is that about making patients better? You tell me.
Why do we pay for medicine?
That's a big question. That's a good question. Why do people have to pay for medicines? There's no government yet that has found enough money or had enough political will to offer free drugs to everybody in their population.
Coming up, Terence paints a picture of an industry in the grips of greedy doctors and drug companies and how deep the lust for money runs in medicine. Did you get vaccinated?
Yes.
Why?
I'm 7 years old. I'm in a high-risk group.
Do you take medications?
Yes, not many. Bare minimum. Like I just had surgery recently for a hernia. Like, what are you going to do? Eventually, everybody takes prescription drugs. There have been about 25,000 suicides worldwide that would not have happened except for Prozac. Because psychiatrists can create a new disease with no evidence of a disease, no physical evidence, no pathology. They just create a new disease. And
What do you mean?
well, depression. And psychiatric drugs are prescribed far too widely. For example, if you lose your job, a lot of people get depressed. Well, naturally, right? It creates anxiety. Am I going to pay my bills, etc.? That doesn't mean you have the kind of depression that they should put you on a powerful psychiatric drug.
What is Big Pharma?
Big Pharma is the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. They sort of got bigger and bigger as they had takeovers and expansions over the years. And there are over 20 of them that are considered to be Big Pharma. They're huge companies. They have huge market values, some bigger than some countries. And they basically operate with impunity. In fact, I call the CEOs for these companies pharma gods. They have so much power. It's phenomenal. They decide what drugs are made, what drugs are not made, and what the prices of the drugs are. Speaking of prices of drugs, there's a drug called Zolgensma, and it's actually, they always talk about breakthrough drugs and miracle drugs, and I think it is one. And it stops a disease that infants are born with. It's a rare disease called spinal muscle atrophy. And of the most serious kind of this disease, the infant will die before they reach 2 years old. They lose control of their muscles. And it's a one-time infusion. And it stops the disease dead in its track. So I want to ask you, how much do you think they might charge for a drug like this?
It's probably pretty expensive.
It's the most expensive drug. The Ontario government pays $2.9 million for one dose. So obviously, almost nobody can afford it. So they have to get governments to pay for it, right? And governments do, because it's a rare disease. So my question is, how do they come up with this price? Because the drug companies never have to publish any information of what they spent on research to produce the drug. And often they get the inventions, the discoveries of the drugs, free. They get it free from universities. In countries that haven't approved the drug because they can't afford it, they have a draw every year. And you can put your infant's name in, and I think they draw them out of a hat or something, and they announce that you've won a free dose.
Seriously?
Yeah. Other parents, if governments won't pay for it, they're going on GoFundMe. And if you think I'm exaggerating, just check out GoFundMe sometime for all the patients that are trying to raise money to pay for life-saving drugs.
But why do those drugs cost that much money?
That's my question, and they don't have to answer. They just say, well, we have to spend so much on research and development. What would happen if a drug company came up with a new miraculous drug that cured all cancers? There's about 200 kinds of cancer. Should we allow a private company to control that and charge for whatever they want for it for the world? Or should that become free to patients across the world? Because the scientists of our past, for example, the Salk vaccine for polio, they gave it to the world free. They said, you can't put a price on sunshine. There should be no profit built into this. The 4 scientists that developed insulin in Canada, in Toronto, they gave it to the world for the price of $1 each. They got paid $1 each. And insulin belongs to the world. But if you look at the way the pharmaceutical companies have handled insulin since, they have insulin that's priced so high that in the United States, millions of people who need insulin can barely afford it. They can barely, they have to choose between eating food, paying for groceries, or affording insulin.
Are they just motivated by greed, or are they just lazy, or why would these things happen?
All of the above. Doctors take money, over half the doctors in the US take money from drug companies. You'd think they would say, no.
Individual doctors.
Individual doctors. And if you want to do a little research on your own, you'd go to this database. It was part of Obamacare, and it says openpayments.org. Okay? And you type now, it's got to be a doctor in the States, but if you're practicing in the States, your name's in there. Your patients can look up, and you can look up your own doctor, see how much money your doctor takes from pharmaceutical companies. Doctors that take money from drug companies prescribe their drugs more often, and that is wrong. A doctor should give a drug to a patient for one reason only. It's the best therapy available to the patient. That's the best not it's the newest, hottest drug, not you were golfing with the drug rep this morning, not they paid you $2,000 to sign a ghostwritten paper, which happens all the time.
But these are all like scenes from movies though, right? Like it seems so cliche.
No, they're all very real.
But it's always in the movies. It's like a cliche thing.
Well, the movies dramatize things, but movies sometimes are the best place to get the truth.
But people fall for the golf?
Because they can do a fictitious story and tell you what really happens without being threat of being sued.
But why would they want to do that? It's just teasing the people?
Well, they do it to make money in the movie business, obviously. They do it to create drama. But fictitious stories, you can tell anything without being sued, as long as you say at the beginning, no real names were used, or we made this story up, or whatever. So you create fictitious characters, but you can reveal more truths in fiction than you can in nonfiction.
So the golf playing stuff works? Like people fall for that?
Huge. It's huge. I'll give you, my favorite example is ghostwriters, okay? Ghostwritten stories. The drug companies will get a ghostwriter paid by them to write wonderful things about their brand new drug. Then they pay the medical journals, which you'd think would be objective, by advertising in them and by buying thousands of copies of the article they write, to publish this article. And the medical journals go into the doctor's offices. But they don't just take a ghostwriter's name to it. They pay a hotshot, it's called an opinion leader doctor, to sign it as if they wrote the article. Now, that would get you kicked out of any medical school, decent medical school in the world. But once you become a doctor, that's legal. You can just say, yes, well, I edited it. They say they edited it. They did nothing. Somebody else wrote the article. They give them $2,500 to put their name on it. This is common practice. Some doctors will do clinical trials in their office. So say you got a disease that's relatively rare, not really rare, but colitis, terrible disease. You near your bowels all the time. And so there's a drug called Remicade. So if you have a doctor who specializes in colitis, they've got a whole bunch of patients, right, that might buy this drug, Remicade. It's $2,600 a month. Now, if you're a sales rep, wouldn't you love to have a list of 100 of those patients? So here's how you get it. You ask the doctor to do a trial of your drug in their office of 100 patients. You give the doctor $10,000 to $20,000 per patient. It's 1 to 2 million on the side. He's making it on the side. Now, he doesn't have to tell the patient he's getting paid. He says to the patient, look, we have a drug, like in other words, they speak for all doctors in the world, we believe is helpful for your condition, colitis. And so we'll give you the drug for free. And listen, you could try it and see how it works, right? And so that goes on for a year. And then they publish the final results, give it to the drug company, and the drug company gets all the names and address, contact for the patients, maybe to offer, because they gave them a free drug too during the trial, to follow up to get them to go to OHIP and say, I'm going to stay on this drug now, $2,600 a month forever, right? They do things they would never do otherwise to get that money. It's rampant, rampant.
You also dedicate the book to the doctors who stand up for the integrity of medicine and research and defy the influence of money in medicine, many at a high personal and professional cost.
Yeah.
They make our world more just.
Yes.
Have you met them? Are you speaking from experience?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. In fact, Dr. David Healy, who I write about in the book, you'll find the story in his book. He's a psychiatrist. Over 25 years ago, he said that antidepressants are causing a lot of suicides. And they fired him from the University of Toronto and the hospital, CAMH. CAMH and University of Toronto worked together. They hired him, and he gave a speech in the US, one of the American universities, and the University of Toronto, where he made reference to what he's published previously, is that Prozac was the first popular antidepressant. There have been about 25,000 suicides worldwide that would not have happened except for Prozac. That was the statement he made, and they dug that up and they found out that he said that. In the meanwhile, Eli Lilly, the company that makes Prozac, were considering a major donation to the University of Toronto, like millions of dollars. And they got involved, and David Healy got fired. So he sued them. He sued the university, and I guess CAMH too. And he got a settlement. And when you get these settlements, same as I can't, you can't say you got it, why you got it or anything. You just have to keep your mouth shut. And that settlement he gave to charity, by the way.
What does he do now?
He's a psychiatrist, and he lives in Canada now. He was at McMaster University, etc. And he's a very principled guy, David Healy. He refused to be vaccinated, not for symbolic reasons, not to make a political statement.
For COVID.
Yeah. He was at McMaster, and they said, nobody's going to work at McMaster as a doctor unless you've taken the vaccine. He said, well, I'm not taking a vaccine that I haven't seen the data on, the data that the vaccine manufacturers hide.
Did you get vaccinated?
Yes.
Why?
I'm 7 years old. I'm in a high-risk group.
Do you take medications?
Yes, not many. Bare minimum. Like I just had surgery recently for a hernia. Like, what are you going to do? Eventually, everybody takes prescription drugs.
So what do you do about that? Do you just
I do my own research for everything, but bare minimum, absolutely bare minimum. I took the vaccine because I was in a high-risk group for a serious disease. I could have ended up in hospital and died. And I knew what I was doing, but that's the decision I made. I made an informed decision, and that's informed consent, right?
Coming up, Terence spills the beans on antidepressants causing suicides, the inexplicable magic of placebo, plus the full story of what happened to his daughter Vanessa and the court settlement that followed.
Well, Accutane was discovered to lead to suicides decades ago. They kept it on the market for 27 years, the manufacturer, which was Roche. So think about that. A drug kills a patient, and the coroner checks a box that says it's a natural death on the death certificate. And that's the law. They don't have a choice. Guess what doctors accept the most money from drug companies? Psychiatrists. Some of them get millions of dollars a year. Millions. Because psychiatrists can create a new disease with no evidence of a disease, no physical evidence, no pathology. They just create a new disease. And
What do you mean?
well, depression. Like, you can find symptoms of serious depression in a patient. You can see it. You can physically, you can't measure it. Sometimes their blood pressure is high, or if they have anxiety, their blood pressure will be high, etc. But mostly, there's no blood test for depression. Like, there's no test you can say, yeah, you definitely got it. Doctors have to ask the patient a series of questions, and they decide if they've got it or not. And psychiatric drugs are prescribed far too widely. For example, if you lose your job, a lot of people get depressed. Well, naturally, right? It creates anxiety. Am I going to pay my bills, etc.? That doesn't mean you have the kind of depression that they should put you on a powerful psychiatric drug.
By widely, do you mean like the number of people who are taking it, or do they just give it away nonchalantly?
Someone's depressed because their marriage split up. Okay? That's not necessarily classic depression that needs a drug. Of course, people are upset. If you feel sad, you have a beloved pet, a dog you've had for 10 years, your dog dies. People feel very sad. That doesn't mean you're in classic depression, that you need a drug because you feel sad. Your marriage breaks up. That doesn't mean you should be going on a drug. What's a drug going to do about your marriage? It's more about your lifestyle and how you handle it. And actually, physical exercise has been proven to be more effective than psychiatric drugs for many patients in getting, if you're feeling depressed. The group in our society that's overprescribed the worst is seniors. What they do to seniors is just disgraceful, the pharmaceutical companies. They have people on 10 different drugs. 10 different drugs it's way too many. You won't even know what happened to the patient if the patient has a heart attack or a stroke if they're on 10 different drugs, because you don't know which drug caused it, if there was a drug, and you don't know which combination of drugs caused it.
How do you know whether a drug works or not?
Great question. The gold standard to prove a drug works is called double-blind clinical testing. One group of patients gets the real drug, and another group of patients gets a placebo, which is like a water pill or a sugar pill or something. And it's called double-blind because the patients don't know if they're getting the real drug or not, technically. And the scientists, the researchers, they don't know. They should be able to tell the difference. But here's the thing. A lot of time, the reports are very close. The patients on placebo report very close to the same results, sometimes just as good. The fact is that many drugs, if not most, work to a degree by placebo. That is, they work because the patient expects them to work. And this isn't just they think they're going to work and they don't really work. If the patient believes the drug will help them, it's given to them by a learned doctor, it can lower blood pressure, it can reduce pain, they can make you feel better in a number of ways. A placebo effect is quite real. Antidepressants are not proven to be much more effective than placebos. So you're taking the risk of all those adverse effects for something that might not even be helping you.
How do you explain that, by the way? In your book, you say placebos work 30 to 70% of the time.
No one knows. It's magic.
Just walking out of the doctor's office, it just feels like even though nothing happened, you just feel like you're like 50% of the thing is already gone.
Because your parents told you to have faith in the doctor. That's what you were taught. That's what we were all taught. And we do have faith in our doctors. And you go in there and somebody's wearing a stethoscope and they got a white coat and you go, help me, right? Well, the pills, though, add to that. Blue pills make people sleep better and feel more relaxed. Red pills are better for pain. It could be 100% sugar. You wouldn't know the difference. But the color of the pills makes a difference, too. So a lot of times they do a trial.
Makes a difference for the patient?
Yeah.
So when you look at the pill.
Your mind can control pain. Your mind can control pain. So you take the red pill and you're going to automatically feel, it's quite real. Now, I'm not saying, and I don't agree with people who say anything that placebos can cure cancer or diabetes or real diseases with a real pathology, but they can control your hormones and your enzymes and your body, things in your body that are unbelievable.
Do we know what placebo really is or why these things happen?
It's inexplicable. If you believe something will make you feel better, you'll feel better. I mean, some people are dying of cancer and they don't even know it because the doctor said you're doing well.
How do you know if you're going to have a negative reaction?
You don't. You don't know. In fact, a drug that's safe for most people, you might have a reaction. Once a drug is identified to cause a serious adverse effect, don't think the drug companies will automatically take it off the market. Let me give you an example. Accutane, which is a drug for severe acne and is prescribed sometimes too widely, it was what the term they use is related to suicides amongst the young people that were taking it. And that cause other serious adverse effects. For instance, dry eyes that may be permanent, like you might have to use drops in your eyes for the rest of your life, or sunburn. And these are all effects from this drug, Accutane. Well, Accutane was discovered to lead to suicides decades ago. They kept it on the market for 27 years, the manufacturer, which was Roche.
With suicide from acne medication?
Yeah. In fact, I ended up meeting.
But where's the correlation? It's like acne and suicide?
No one really knows why they lead to it. Why antidepressants? Also, benzodiazepines, Ativan, and all those drugs that end in van or PAM or whatever, they can lead to suicide. They can also lead to very serious acts of violence, and antidepressants as well. In fact, there's a website I recommend to my readers. You go to this website, which is SSRI Stories, one word, .org. There are 7,000 media stories there, mostly from US and Canada, where people have committed bizarre acts of violence, like very frightening. A mother in the US drowned her children one at a time after taking the antidepressants. Mass murders, suicides, lots, shootings. In fact, you can go to this website and type in school shootings, and you'll find a list of them, including Colorado and a whole bunch of others, where the shooter was either on an antidepressant or had withdrawn from it. They tell you what drug they were taking. Now, these are stories from magazines and newspapers.
But how do you know that they did these things because they were taking the drug?
Well, in this case, it's a matter of the huge number of serious adverse reactions, the huge number of suicides and violent reactions that correlate with taking the drug.
So why is this all happening in the world? So are patients who suffer adverse reactions, are they just seen as collateral damage?
Yes. By the pharmaceutical industry, yes. Yeah. And here's the point, I haven't told you this yet. Of all the serious adverse drug reactions, about half of them are preventable. Not all of them are preventable. There are sometimes the doctor gives you a drug because you really need it, and because if you don't, you're going to die. And so there is a risk factor. Patients have to learn that before you take prescription drugs, you should be sure as you can be that the benefit will outweigh the risk for you. We're talking about 80 million harms or effects a year in the United States alone from prescription drugs. 80 million a year. About 200,000 deaths. Now, the reason I can't give you an accurate figure on that is they get covered up in various ways, the deaths.
How?
Okay, one of the ways is that coroners in many states, and I think in all the provinces, they're required to put down a means of death and a cause of death. Now, if the doctor believes that a prescription drug was the cause of death or the means of death that made the patient die, there are 4 classifications they have. They can have suicide, they can use accidental, they can use homicide, murder, or they can use, there's a category of other and a category of natural. Okay? So when a prescription drug causes a death in most jurisdictions, the coroner, if this is a known adverse drug reaction, that is one that doctors already knew about, they have to classify that as natural. Okay? So think about that. A drug kills a patient and the coroner checks a box that says it's a natural death on the death certificate. And that's the law. They don't have a choice. Another way is Very few doctors, very few, probably less than 2%, ever report a serious adverse drug reaction. They don't have to by law. I tried to get that into Vanessa's law, but it's not a federal power in Canada. It's provinces. The provinces, any province can make it a law that doctors must report serious adverse drug reactions. They just don't do it because the doctors don't want to do it.
What happened to your daughter, Vanessa?
Vanessa was, when she was 15 years old, she had a problem sometimes throwing up after meals, which about 1 out of 4 teenage girls does. And so we took it to our family doctor, and the doctor recommended this drug made by Johnson & Johnson, Janssen Ortho, which is their drug arm, called Propulsit. It's called Prepulsit in the US, PRE, Propulsit in Canada, and there's about 60 other names worldwide, which is a safety issue as well. And they said that would help. He said that would help the food move through her system. So she took the drug for a while. In the meanwhile, she saw a gastroenterologist, a specialist, who never warned her there were any safety issues about the drug.
Why was she taking it in the first place?
To help food move through her system, because she was throwing up after meals sometimes.
Why?
That's a good question. There's eating disorders are serious diseases. In fact, they're very serious if you get them. She did not have anorexia. She was natural weight. She was 5'9". She weighed 120 pounds. She was healthy. Her doctor wrote she was the picture of perfect health, but she had this problem throwing up after meals sometimes.
And then what happened?
We went out shopping on one Saturday, March 18th, 2000. And we came in, she stayed home and was baking cookies in the kitchen. And I came and I sat down in my chair in the study, and she wanted to negotiate her evening's activity, Saturday night for a 15-year-old, which is something most fathers go, oh, I don't want to go through this again. So I said, look, we'll talk about it after dinner. So she jumped up and went to go up to her room, and she fell dead on the floor. She just, like a giant hand had pushed her down on the floor. Of course, I didn't know she was dead till I went and felt her carotid artery, her heart had stopped. I called my brother, who is a surgeon. He immediately said, you've got to give her mouth-to-mouth, call an ambulance. And so a nurse who lived 3 doors down came. We alternated giving her mouth-to-mouth till the ambulances arrived. First thing they said is, she taking any drugs? No, just this drug Propulsit, which she was taking for food to go through her system. They couldn't get her heart started at home. And so this was any parent's nightmare. Like, she was otherwise very, very healthy. They said, well, you better go look in her room for drugs. So here we were searching her room for drugs that weren't there. She never did any street drugs or anything like that. And so we got in the ambulance with her to go to the hospital, and they got her heart started about 25 minutes later. It's too late. It's too late. And she never regained consciousness. She died the next day.
The drug caused the death.
The drug caused the death, and the drug company claimed it didn't. That's what they always do. Drug companies never take responsibility when there's serious harm to a patient. They always look for some other thing that must have happened. They theorize. She took too much, or she was taking other drugs at the same time, none of which was true. But that's the way drug companies always handle these things.
Is Propulsit still sold today?
It was taken off the market the day before Vanessa's funeral in the US. We heard it on the radio. And of course, Health Canada, they always drag, they wait and wait, take their time. And 3 months later, because of the publicity I was creating, they took Propulsit off the market in Canada. But it's still, as far as I know, it's still on the market in 50 countries, and it may be more. This is the thing, this is more forbidden knowledge. I can't call Janssen Ortho or Johnson & Johnson and say, how many countries are you selling this drug in, and how many adverse reactions, serious adverse reactions have been reported? That's all confidential business information.
So are there people who took Propulsit but nothing happened to them?
Lots.
So they were okay?
Lots. However, there were 13,000 litigants who said, we've lost a family member, or it was a family member who said they had damage to their heart caused by Propulsit. And so they settled with 13,000 people. They meet with them. They never say our drug caused the problem. They say, we're going to investigate. So they just put money on the table. The lawyers all get paid. And they interviewed the patients one by one. and they would say, okay, you're going to get $10,000, you get $50,000 or whatever. And then they try and see if there's money left over, which they get to keep. This is normal in the pharmaceutical industry, the class actions. And they settle the class actions because it's damage to their brand, but also the brand for Janssen Ortho, for their other drugs, and the brand for Johnson & Johnson. But I had been making such a stink in Canada and doing so much publicity. Once they settled with the 13,000 litigants, or they were in the process of settling with the 13,000 litigants in the US, they came to me. They called my lawyer and they said, we want to sit down and settle. So I had a choice. My wife and I, we had a choice. We could agree to that, or we could insist on our day in court under legal rules in Ontario. But if we insisted on our day in court and tried to get a jury to say, yes, that drug caused her death, if we lost by the civil procedure rules, we would have had to pay our legal fees and the legal fees for the drug company.
How much would that be?
Probably $1.5 million or something. So we would have lost our house. So we lost our daughter and we would have lost our house. So we went to settlement talks, and what I'm allowed to say, I agreed to say, is the matter was settled to the agreement of both parties.
So you guys settled?
Yeah, and I wanted you to know why, because if you don't, you're putting your whole livelihood at risk, your home and whatever. And so it's very difficult for an individual to get justice in the legal system in Canada. It's easier in the States, where you can get guaranteed a jury trial and juries are more sympathetic.
What should you trust your doctor with? When you're in your doctor's office, what should you be looking out for?
Okay, so I have a whole chapter there, how to talk to your doctor. I give a list of about 23 questions you should ask your doctor, and I'm very serious about that. And some doctors, if they're in a hurry, too bad, right? They're supposed to be taken care of. They're supposed to answer your questions. I say to, if say you're an elderly person or middle-aged person and you get, white coat syndrome, like you go to the doctor, a lot of people, they can't get an accurate reading of their blood pressure in a doctor's office because they're so nervous, because they're afraid the doctor's going to say you got a serious illness, right? So I say just take somebody with you to remind you what questions to ask. You got to take a new attitude with your doctor. And if your doctor doesn't want to give you answers to those questions, I say get a new doctor. And it's hard to find doctors, but it's a very serious matter. Now, if they do answer the questions and you get the answers you need, take notes. Well, first thing is, do I really need this drug? Because a lot of doctors prescribe it because they know that you're probably going to be fine and you'll give the drug credit. It doesn't matter, you get better. So they give real drugs as placebo. But if they get you on a new drug on the market and you think it worked, they could have a customer for life, especially blood pressure drugs and psychiatric drugs and stuff. Customer for life. It might be doing nothing for you, but you think it is, so they got you for life. That's the best marketing program ever.